Stop LAPD Spying Coalition is a coming together of various individuals and organizations with a whole bunch of concern and recognizing how the police state was rapidly expanding.
We're an abolitionist group focused on dismantling all forms of state-sanctioned surveillance, spying, and infiltration, but also policing. We started off the coalition in 2011, and our campaign that launched the coalition was against the Suspicious Activity Reporting Program, a nationwide initiative that's also international, that basically allowed officers to collect secret files on people for using photography in public, videography in public, drawing in public, asking a business its hours of operation because you seemed like you were suspicious, right? And they defined suspicion as this observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning of criminal or terrorist activity. But this was really one of the first burgeonings of surveillance and the changing nature of policing into a counterterrorism and counterinsurgency tactic within domestic law enforcement.
So the coalition over the last 10 years has been mapping the infrastructure of surveillance. We have been organizing around that. We've been fighting back. We've been demanding that these programs need to be dismantled. We're not lawyers. We're not here to advocate for change or reform the system. But it's really about knowledge exchange, knowledge sharing, and for the communities to understand the scale and scope of the structures of surveillance and how deeply it's embedded in every aspect of our lives.
We are based in Skid Row. That's where our home is. And so it's really important to us that constantly, whatever we create, if we don't have someone from the community of Los Angeles Community Action Network that's actively involved with that organization or local to the Skid Row community, we take whatever we create and we actively get in place. So the idea of making decisions collectively is something that we really cherish and we hold.
When everything is by design, what choices can we make towards an abolition future instead of a carceral one?
The whole point of the archive is to really build community power, is to really kind of engage knowledge building, knowledge sharing, and that history.
In a sense, what the archiving project has been launched is, from our point of view, is number one, to tell the story of the coalition. That what was it that brought people together? What were the concerns at the time and this moment in time that brought people together, understanding that this is going to have a dire impact in the long run on our communities. From there on, what was the process that folks engaged in? Because ultimately, as organizers, it's about storytelling. It's that how do we bring that story that people can relate to? So when we talk about not a moment in time, but a continuation of history, by creating a visual layout over the last 300 years that, look, this is how surveillance has evolved. This is where we are today. So it really allows people to take a step back and not only have aha moments, but to relate to it personally as well.
So why is the coalition doing this? So pretty much we have always been kind of filing public records requests, and that's how you get information from a public entity, and you demand these documents because they receive public funding. You're allowed to kind of do the sunshine law on them to a certain extent. Sometimes there's exceptions to the law and they're not allowed to disclose certain types of information, but you can also pursue that and force them to. And we did that in some cases as well, in a couple cases in our public records requests. So what happened is that we were getting so many that we were like, wow, like we have so much information, we want to make that available to the community. But we also wanted to make it available in a way that was digestible, in a way that made sense to folks, where they could actually attach to it and kind of learn something from it. Because right now the city does have a portal that they make public all the public records requests that are filed once the public records request is closed. And then they redact to the information of whoever requested the info, and they make all that public, and you can sign on to the portal, search, and find information. But a lot of that is meant for people who are researching, people who know how to do that kind of stuff, people who are comfortable with going in and looking for certain information. And so we know that not everybody operates in the world that way. So the first part of actually archiving was really kind of fun, long, and then became tedious. And but then it made me realize that it's what we needed to do, and this was something that also came up, was we needed to start a culture within our organization. I literally went through every document that I had saved in my predictive policing files, and then I went through every email over like a 4-year period to find things that I may not have saved that were, of interest to people, because I think that one of the things I was focusing on the most was that I wanted documents that were also generated by the community to be seen as like worthy. But I wanted to also honor all the work that community was doing. In that archive process, when you don't necessarily have a culture, it can be kind of overwhelming, right? But I think that's the first lesson. I should start learning how to archive my daily happenings, right? Because that is what essentially helps to share knowledge with people in generations to come about building power, right? Building power against state violence, how to bring people together, what meetings look like, how long they take. This is how we teach each other. So, to think about that as you're organizing, like what story are you telling to the world, and why is it important? How do we keep this kind of skill? And not only how do we build a skill within the community, how do we set an example, but how do we ourselves, preserve the story of the coalition?
On a personal level, and that I always look at archives as the people's history, because many a times, a lot of these things, when we look back, it's more or less in a broad stroke, and so all of these critical nuances are missing sometimes, or we are not aware of that in that given moment 200 years ago or 100 years ago or 50 years ago, given the resources and capacities that people had, how were they organizing? What was going on? What was the methodology? I think this is such a critical piece of our work. How are people in this current moment fighting back? What are the tools and tactics that they're using? How are they building their story? How are they building their story to the larger community? What does that community organizing look like? And how is power being built to fight back and further advance our journey towards that liberation?
But I remember a few times just having these really long conversations and then just being like, whoa, that was really intense, but we came to a conclusion that everybody sat really good with. And so, and I think about that praxis, right? That ability to have, to maintain that ability to talk in depth with people. You spend a lot of time doing something thinking, you've got this amazing idea, but if you truly want it to be something that builds power and brings people together and creates a space where, where people can feel comfortable, then you need to not only create those skills where people, feel like they can say what's really on their mind, that the space can hold that and really be willing to discuss that. And I think I've learned that the most in organizing. And I think it's being vulnerable, with community to create something and generate something together. So that's been my biggest guiding principle, but I think it is one in pretty much everything I do or everything I attempt to do. And I think every day I'm learning to get better at it and to be more committed to it.
For myself, I see this work of being a kind of project manager as a part of my social practice work, in which the social, cultural, political, etc. encounters are the mediums with to carve my body through time and space. So I began training as a researcher with the intention of taking on the role of reading, studying, writing with and for my communities. And I had convinced myself that there wasn't much that an academic could offer in community spaces apart from at times like insufferable elitism. And so I was hesitant to figure out how I would have to re-navigate these dynamics of power as a PhD student when just several years ago, I was far from finishing up even a BFA. So, and it was really with my collaborative work in developing the archive that I realized I had skills to offer my communities that I had learned in graduate school through academic professionalization. But I still do tell myself that, once I begin to feel comfortable in my role is when I need to reflect on what I might need to reconsider in my practice, because the last thing I want to do is to take the trust of the coalition and its community members for granted.
It was definitely a learning experience. I'm not an expert on abolition ideals. They did appeal to me, and that's why I got into the project in the first place, but I've definitely learned a lot there. As far as specific tech things, open source code and things like that, I've kind of always had those ideals, and I don't know that any of them are necessarily silver bullets either, but they do help move society in that direction, at least a little bit.
Once we got an archive team started, a solid group of 5, and began holding regular meetings, I also started reaching out to people within my network, such as academics, artists, archivists, and anybody who was willing to let me pick their brain for their thoughts about this project, for like their perspectives from varied fields of expertise. So, for example, I learned of the notions of folksonomies, or folk taxonomies, or community-generated vernacular vocabularies from a conversation with Sonoe Nakasone, who is a community archivist at Chapel Hill. So I was sharing with her that, we were planning to crowdsource the archival process by asking volunteers to generate the metadata for each document, that we'd need like a ton of volunteers. And, also by this time, I had been like begrudgingly researching like indexing theory, or like how creating indexing terms is inherently an exclusionary process of like epistemic violence. And so Sonoe had responded that, yes, generating folksonomies is like such a great idea. And I had told her, like, I had never heard of this term before. I am definitely going to use it from now on. So I found this process of seeking in-depth conversations to be incredibly enriching to the research aspect of this project, which included anything from like looking at examples of community-based archives in existence to readings of academic theories and various disciplines across the humanities. I'm continuing to research and expand what the form and conceptual frameworks of this archive could be, such as thinking through the notions of the an-archive, or to archive otherwise.
My role as a designer has been to listen closely to our collective goals and have a deep understanding of our broader vision, and to be strategic in how we design and build our technologies. The tools that I've used for this project have been real basic, rudimentary things like listening and asking questions, as well as like whiteboarding, collaborating with team members. Technical tools have been Adobe Creative Suite. Most of the designs were created in Illustrator. Some Photoshop was done for some of the imagery. We were able to get some of the experiences of the archive out there, and so we were able to get some feedback to help us better inform our designs, and that has introduced a couple changes along the way as we've been building it. But the overall design goal has been to create a digital tool that is accessible and easy to use. My first and foremost guiding principle is to always consider accessibility. What I mean by accessibility is that it needs to be informed and shaped by the audiences that will end up using it. And that's kind of what we were trying to do with the archive, is to invite different community members to tell us how to design this by letting us know what's needed, what's missing, and how it could be the most useful to them?
Process has been a good bit of just kind of planning at first and talking about what we wanted to build. We had some decisions to make as far as architecting the site, choosing between WordPress and a Drupal-based implementation. We decided to go with WordPress for the build, and also that's more of an approachable tool that other community members could get involved with. We also have a public repository so that other community members can contribute using open source code. A big part of this effort that differs from a lot of the other work I do was just working directly with a community that was affected by these technologies. A lot of times, especially in the tech world, people that may want to do good, but they'll end up building something for a community instead of necessarily with them and asking exactly what the community wants. So another big part of the process there was when we took the initial prototype we had built and showed it to the community. We got feedback from them. What I think is kind of new, especially in this project, is how to allow the community to do their own categorization alongside the state language. So that really led to a lot of discussions and redesign, as well as rethinking the actual user interface of how we'll get the community involved. I think we're stepping into new territory and kind of had to think of a whole new idea of how to approach it. Most archival work I've done outside of this project only focused really on the state language of the documents involved. I think all that really came out of this kind of more horizontal approach that the coalition has, where they don't want imposed hierarchy of decision making, but want kind of this horizontal community decision making. And I've found that really great and useful.
What is metadata? So metadata is data about data. If you right click on any file and choose properties, what you'd be seeing is, for example, technical metadata. So it contains things like file type, size, creation date, and so on. So the metadata that we're developing into folksonomies is descriptive metadata. So which is anything from, the title, author, descriptions, and so on. And folksonomy has many names, such as people-powered metadata, grassroots taxonomy, democratic indexing, which all mean the same thing, community-generated vernacular vocabulary. So another aspect of my work in this project has been to compile and define training tools and references. When starting to develop the metadata for the initial PRA documents we decided to focus on, which I thought would actually be like the most easiest and straightforward aspect of this whole thing, I felt the political implications of exclusion in standardizing subject and indexing terms, and realized the kind of primary importance of a polyvocal approach to metadata through the development of folksonomies. So as a majority of the archival materials are PRA documents received from the City of Los Angeles and the Los Angeles Police Department, I feel especially mindful of generating approaches for contextualizing these materials so that our archive doesn't appear to be just another mirror repository of state documents. So creating metadata solely off of state documents would have led to searchable terms that were only knowable to those who create and use state language. And so we found that the generating of folksonomies would be absolutely crucial in order to make the archive as useful as possible to community members who might search terms like historically criminalized instead of chronic offender, or rebellion or uprising instead of riot or urban unrest, neighborhood names instead of jurisdiction names.
Basically, the archive itself has not launched because the intent was there to bring the community in its creation, while it was being created, to say, like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this idea? This is something that we want everybody to own. This is something that we want everybody to be a part of. So help us. This is what we think, throw it back at us. Is this a good idea? And those meetings were really amazing because not only were people so excited about the autonomy of having their own history gathered, but there were so many ideas generated by people. And I think that that kind of intention really is starting to create the idea that it's a community archive. And so those things were very important to me because, I want it to kind of have that feeling, right? That anybody jumps in, that it's all the multiple faces of the community that become a part of this project and become a part of this archive. I'm really, really thrilled. And I'm going to stop there because I've been talking a lot. And I'm just going to pass over to Kyle.
Hi, my name's Kyle McDonald. I'm here to kind of listen and learn and hopefully contribute somehow, but I'm really open to hearing what that might be, how I might be able to help. I feel like my expertise is definitely on the side of kind of like automated analysis and some things that can be done with like code. But I do also know a bit about kind of how sort of surveillance industrial complex works and how some of these organizations work together and a lot of like the technical side of that. So if there's places where I can kind of contribute in a more manual, not automated way, I'm really happy to do that too. I'd love to hear from you, Victoria.
Hi, so I'm Victoria. My pronouns are she, they. I'm currently a UCLA student, a PhD student in social welfare. I'm really interested in this project specifically because my entire work revolves around like counter narratives. And so, in any space I can, I try to question how we can bring the narratives back to the community. Whether that's through like this academic space and the like theories that we use and contesting those, and really making sure that, I stay engaged within the community work because that's what's most important to me and what's always has been. So I think this archival project is a great way to do that, making these documents like dynamic and speaking back to these documents. Andrew, if you want to go next.
Oh, cool. Thanks. I guess politics is most important for me. I got involved in politics at the tail end of the anti-globalization movement right before the war on terror started sort of ramping up. So I have a lot of experience like consulting with and working with students who are doing projects that have some sort of technical or media-based component to them, which is perhaps why this project sort of stuck out to me because I felt like I might have some resources to contribute to it. I'm not the most technical person in the world. Like I kind of know my way around technical projects, but I think I'm better to sort of like help brainstorm and figure out how social systems intersect with the technical construction of things like websites and apps and installations. So I'll pass it to Vida Silvestre. Is that how you pronounce it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, it's Vida Silvestre. Hi, I respond to he, him pronouns. I heard about this project by like attending one of the online like Tuesday webinars. And it was really interesting because I like the idea of putting our own language into these files that we can like then tap into and have it be accessible to us because we're the ones making it. And by we, I mean like people who grew up in LA who are from the hood. And so I think it's really important, right, that we are part of this project because, I mean, Lincoln Heights is the target. It's a laser zone. I see how all these threads, are like coming to my life, and I'm just like happy to see what can flourish from it. Have you gone, Zach? No. Okay, your turn.
Hey, I'm Zach. He, him pronouns. This project is interesting because I just like the idea of taking data that they collected and like slicing it the way we want to. So yeah, that's like my main interest is just recovering that and painting a different story, I guess.
Maybe part of like that creative process could also be multiple languages where the narratives are also accessible for, the like, I don't know how many hundreds of languages that exist in LA alone. So, because it'll also like facilitate cross communication organizing, and it's really important. That kind of like led to this thought of like there could be a function where we can save the work that we've done on the page and then revisit it at another time. It's more like technical, but also like the pitch that y'all gave, Jamie, was like really cool. I think it was you and Dillon, and what attracted me was just this notion that like we could put into the file the language, the words that we use to make this accessible. So I think that that's gonna like draw people in, because we have our own ways of talking about things, and so we can be part of that.
I was thinking about having people share their own narratives, and having like a story pop up, or if somebody wanted to submit an image or a reflection or a poem, that would also pop up. And so I'm thinking about, I'm not sure if this is just gonna be like a PRA kind of project right now for this specific thing that we're talking about, this archival project. But I was wondering about how to like incorporate those kind of like narratives into it. And people are able to create their own kind of stories through PRA documents, how to like present those on the website to kind of get their own stories. Like, oh, this is a story from YJC. Somebody from YJC like made this story out of these different documents, or here's a reflection I have on this project. How to incorporate that onto the to the space, so it's actually like including that really personal part of it.
Something that really draws me into really complicated projects is when I can get a really high level overview. And sometimes it's hard, I think, especially with abolition, to see how each of these steps like leads to the eventual goal. And I'd imagine something like future stories, like the stories that haven't happened yet. And for people, especially like me, who are pretty new to some of these things, like how does this play into not just reform, but actually abolition? I would love to see that. And I feel like it could help me get even more excited for like being part of this kind of movement.
We started to develop like, what do we need? What do we need to keep the archive going? Like, what are the different positions that we need? And what are the minimum things that we need people to be able to do for us? Because when you think about volunteer time, and this is how specific we were getting, some people can volunteer for 2 weeks. If they can volunteer for 2 weeks, how do we get them in? What can we get them to do to help archive? If they can volunteer for a long time, how do we get them to, start to create a culture where they're, organizing the volunteers coming in and out? So we specifically laid out a whole landscape of the different needs of the archive so that we could slowly, as people were becoming interested in it, start to figure out how to plug people in and get better at plugging people in.
Where are we in 2021 in that long sort of trajectory of storytelling as to what has been our fight? People have been generationally fighting for abolition, and we are fiercely an abolitionist organization. So just as generations past have incrementally built that power, incrementally built that understanding, incrementally provided us with I would say that North Star of liberation, in a sense. But how do we continue to move in that direction? How do we stay consistent? So that's why for our archiving project, extremely critical. Then how could it contribute to this extremely valuable and critical history that we have, the archives that we already have, and how do we contribute in this moment in time for the next generations to look at that? And really, not just for the next generations, but for the current generations as well. How can research be done? Like, what does it mean to really kind of just shift the focus? And that, I would say, is one of the biggest contribution of the coalition, to take away this language of surveillance and fighting back through legal means into building that knowledge and building that community power through community organizing to dismantle the system.
We've been talking to the Southern California Library for folks who are familiar with that space. It's like a library that's in South Central that houses a lot of the organizing history of Los Angeles. And so all I can imagine is like 4 times, as many times as we can, hosting community events, whether it's in our neighborhood, whether it's there. and going through documents with people, having a research experience with people, collecting our own histories together. And there's so many ideas of how to engage and use an archive as a tool to build power, to build knowledge, to take care of our history, to make it available for others.
The Stop LAPD Spying archive is currently primarily exists in the digital form, as the PRA documents were received digitally. However, we do eventually want it to exist as a physical archive as well, to support accessibility of the archive to local community and Skid Row residents who might not have access to the internet or a smartphone. So we hope for the project to exist as an ongoing archive of community resistance and a community organizing tool that has efficacy in the present. And we also hope to have ongoing programming and fellowship opportunities with this archive as well.